says International School of Survival and Preparedness. Today I want to talk a little bit about history, how it's relevant in today's bushcraft, outdoors, even in the modern militia mobilization and the way we deal with concepts. But we're going to do this in 3 parts, okay? Today we're going to talk about history. The other 2 are going to be talking about loadouts. So let's go ahead and start with a little bit of our history. When we talk about bushcraft, we're actually talking about a European term given to woodcraft, or the ability to live out sustainably in the woods. It's really different from backpacking and camping, where you're loading your backpack up or your car up with all the materials that you need for a set period of time, or trekking where you have legs and you have logistic resupply points on those legs. When we're talking about bushcraft, we're really talking about carrying the tools and just a small, couple days worth of material, knowing that we're going to have this ability to sustain ourselves for extremely long periods of time in whatever environment that we're in. Now, this came from Longhunters. When in the colonial times, pursuing the protein required people to go out there into the frontier and hunt down large amounts of meat to bring back to the homestead to feed the family. Well, and also there was commercial Longhunters that would bring in meat sources into the larger villages, cities, in order to sell commercially. These individuals would carry with them the a very minimalistic loadout, but it really focused mainly on the ability to sustain themselves and replenish food supplies, make shelter, be able to make fire, be able to, purify water, etc. Now, water purification today is a lot more complex than what it was back then, but the point was that they were able to sustain themselves. Now, the foods that they carried were things like tack, or parched corn, or pemmican. Now, all of these are very shelf-stable, nutritious. Pemmican's got a lot of fat and caloric intake. These all were highly praised and valued long-term storage. They would also supplement things like flour and grains along with them, but it was always in small quantities, and those were shelf-stable sources that they could add to other things as they foraged, or they were able to hunt and get themselves meat in order to subsidize themselves. Now, understand modern tack that we talk about from, let's say, the Civil War to post-Civil War era, to what was referred to affectionately as a ship's biscuit, are a little bit different. But if you are going to use tack or pemmican, use a modern recipe for that. Parched corn is parched corn is parched corn, and it's odd because it's not popped corn, but it's corn that is roasted over a fire to where all of the kernels crack. Some of them will look like popcorn, but if you were to eat them, they're really crunchy and grainy. And then it is mortared into a meal that, cakes and different products would be able to be made, like, hoe cakes, ash cakes, stuff like that would be able to be made from, and that's really how they sustain themselves. And these are all principles that can still be utilized today to make sustainable light foods that can be carried with you to supplement anything that you need on your loadout. Now, Longhunters, the way they got kind of tied into the military history side of it, in the colonial times, this is where your marksmen and your self-reliant personalities were coming from. And when the revolution started to come around, the colonial army had the regular army, but they were fortified by a lot of militia. Within that militia was, skirmishers are, these are the precursors to, modern special operations. But, at that time, what these individuals were able to do was stay out in the field for significantly long periods of time, providing harassing fire. What they would be able to do is follow or run forward of large maneuver forces. As the British were moving from point A to point B, they would produce harassing fire. They would start shooting officers. They would slow down the movement, troop movements. They would strain the logistics train. They would attack and sabotage logistics trains. And you can see the value of this. When you're talking about a sizable force that's got the advantage not only in size, but also technology and experience, these small, scrimmaging forces were able to really conduct harmful operations against the enemy. So they had a huge contribution to the success of the revolution. They were used significantly also in, wars such as the French Indian Wars. A lot of different scout units were done during, the Indian Wars, as well as into modern warfare, and the rest is history. You're talking about the precursor to modern guerrilla warfare, as well as how things and the concepts of a standalone force being able to be integrated into an indigenous population, gaining the hearts and minds, as well as being able to sustain themselves logistically independently of a large sizable force or under covert operation, has huge value. So, when we're talking about modern militia, Lightfoot maneuvering or mobilization, having the majority of the force size in some type of element like that is critical. Equipment loadout is key to that. And a lot of that equipment would be based on, again, a percentage of it being allocated to self-reliance and self-sufficiency. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the interior side, or what that actual loadout is, but understand that the percentages and proportions are going to be kind of weird. You're going to be going, well, why isn't there more water? Or why isn't there more food? Or why do I really need that? And we're going to go into that specifically. But some of the percentages that I want to talk about are, when we talk about weight, we're really focusing on a weight below 20 pounds, all right? Dry weight. That means that there's no water, there's no food in the loadout. And if we're talking about in modern militia or modern maneuver mobilization, there's no combat load or anything like that, or even in modern military concepts, this is not something, the total weight of what our boys in Afghanistan or Iraq would be carrying. It'd be, twice to 3 times that weight, with body armor and ammo and everything like that. But what this is a kit for sustainability, to be able to allow an individual to stay out on his own for a significant period of time. So we're going to concentrate on things like building fires, right? Water purification, sheltering, containers, cutting tools. These are, exposure. These are all things that are key. Now, the foods that we would implement in here would be the same as back in the day. I would do tack, parched corn, pemmican, or even dehydrated, home dehydrated foods. And you can dehydrate soups, you can cook rice and beans, dehydrate it so it can be quickly constituted in lukewarm water. Because sometimes being able to use a fire is not advantageous if you're wanting to do a low imprint or like stealth camping, right? So being able to have these abilities in this kit is key. So as far as wet weight, a lot of the focus is going to be on water, and we'll do that in 2 different ways. We're going to have a water bladder, right, like a Camelback, And then we'll have 2 liters of water that's sustained within the kit itself. Then we'll have a container and a filter in order to reproduce or replace that element. Food sustainment, you know, obviously snares, foraging, and there's a skill set behind that that's going to be outside of the discussion that we're going to have, that needs to be addressed by whatever program or by the individual, that's going to allow them to be able to identify local edibles, protein source habitat, etc., so that they're going to be able to move into there. Now for mine and the locations that I'm at, I use snares, a lot of yo-yos, because I can use that both in snare for small rodent and game, as well as fishing kits, etc., is what I use. You know, there's a lot to be said on the use of wrist rockets and slingshots as well, as far as being able to get small game. Look, in a real situation in preparedness, if it's grid down, everybody's looking for protein sources. These individuals that are going to do the lone wolf thing and think they're going to be able to sustain themselves in one locale without moving or being nomadic, is got a very unrealistic view of the hardships of being a hunter-gatherer. That type of lifestyle has to be nomadic, and you have to move with the population, because those populations take time to replenish, and it'll get cleaned out during around areas of, you know, large populations very quickly. You know, you're not the only one with that concept. So, you know, in the practicality of what we're talking about, we're really talking about not deer, elk, you know, large game. You're going to be eating a lot of rats, rabbits, and birds, and that's what we're talking about. Being able to forage and know your fungi and mushrooms as well as your plants would be huge in being able to supplement anything that you can garner when you're on movement, which would be beneficial. All right, so that's the history, and that's the scope of the discussion. The next video is going to show the details of what it is that is in our pack and how to pack it out. The first one is going to be more of a smaller maneuver pack. We would probably call this in the preparedness a 72-hour or just maybe a bush kit. That would depend upon, you know, what you're focusing it for, and it could be used as an egress. The second one that we're going to use will be a leaving home for good bag. This is going to have everything that we need for long-term sustainability, never return home, and be nomadic and out in the woods. So we're going to look at the profile and the weights. Now the weights do differ between the two of them because of the content. All right, guys. Till next time, peace. Be aware. Stay strong.